The morning Karen finally snapped didn't look anything like the peaceful lake sunrise I used to picture during the 16 years my wife Lena and I clawed our way toward owning this place. Instead of quiet ripples and soft pink light drifting across Crescent Bay, the air at 7:42 a.m. was cold enough to bite and the mist curled off the water like slow-moving ghosts. And then a scream tore the stillness apart as Karen exploded out of her glass mansion wearing nothing but a floral bathrobe in rage, her blonde hair looking like it had fought a storm and lost, her slippers sinking into the wet earth while she sprinted toward my crew shrieking, "Stop! Stop right now!" In a voice cracking like a cheap speaker, but the post driver pounding steel into the ground didn't stop for her tantrum, each metal pole slamming straight into the earth and slicing through the center of her precious $20,000 rose garden so petals burst into the air like blood-red confetti raining onto her robe until she looked like a deranged Valentine's Day mascot melting in the sun. She clawed at the half-built fence with chipped nails and mascara streaking down her face like black rivers, while her husband stood on the porch in pajama shorts muttering, "Karen, they're filming, just come inside." But she was too far gone, threatening lawyers, sheriffs, the HOA, and maybe divine intervention while I sipped my coffee beside my new no trespassing sign, breathing in the scent of crushed roses and quiet justice, because this meltdown was just the beginning of a war she didn't know she'd already lost. Most people have no idea what 16 years of sacrifice actually looks like. They think saving for a dream is skipping Starbucks or canceling Netflix. But for us it was eating generic cereal because the name brand stuff cost too much, driving beat-up cars held together by duct tape and stubbornness, wearing thrift store coats while our friends posted vacation photos from beaches we couldn't spell. It was me, Jake, a worn-down mechanic with a bad back and rust ground into my fingerprints, and Lena, the strongest person I've ever known, fighting rheumatoid arthritis that made her joints burn like she'd been holding fire instead of coffee cups, and the lake wasn't some retirement fantasy. It was the one place where floating in the water eased her pain enough for her to breathe without wincing. So every dollar we saved, every holiday we skipped, every repair we delayed, all of it was for a quiet cabin on a lake where she could move without agony. When the listing popped up, 1 acre of lakefront on Crescent Bay, we drove out and found a weather-beaten cabin leaning like it had back problems, deck railing that wobbled when you exhaled, a roof that looked like it had survived a tornado, but the shoreline. God, that shoreline was a miracle, crystal water folding into gentle waves that sounded like hope, and it didn't matter that our neighbors' homes looked like luxury magazines. We fell in love immediately. That was before we knew her name, Karen Beaumont, Queen Tyrant of Crescent Bay, HOA dictator, rumor magnet, the woman the realtor warned us about with a whisper. Don't cross her unless you enjoy paperwork and misery. And I laughed because every neighborhood had one nightmare, right? I didn't know she would become a full-blown natural disaster aimed directly at us. On moving day, Lena stood on the dock, shoulders relaxing for the first time in months, and just when I thought life was finally giving us a break, the sharp click of designer heels echoed across the boards like gunshots. I turned and there she was, golden hair pulled tight, sunglasses reflecting the whole lake like she owned the sun, a stack of official-looking papers in her hand and judgment dripping off her like expensive perfume. "You must be the new residents," she said, voice dipped with disgust, handing me what she claimed was a community easement. It smelled like lies, the date stamp crooked, the language vague, the signature looking like it had been scribbled after a few glasses of overpriced wine. I said, "Ma'am, this is private property, my deed," but she cut me off with a laugh sharp enough to slice rope, telling me deeds were misleading and the shoreline had always been for community use. Then, with the dramatic flair of a soap opera villain, she pressed a button on her phone and said, "Sheriff Morrison, yes, it's Karen, we have a situation." A situation. I was holding a wrench, not a hostage. It's 17 minutes later, faster than an ambulance arrives for a real emergency. The sheriff rolled up, posture stiff until he saw her, then his whole attitude softened like butter left on a stove. He listened to her trembling, fake-crying performance about how I'd been aggressive, nodding along like he was her personal security guard, and neighbors peeked out whispering Karen warned us about him, while Morrison told me to work things out with the community, which meant do what Karen wants. When he drove away, she gave me a smile so smug I swear the temperature rose 10 degrees, and for the first time I felt like a trespasser on my own land. Then came the weeks of petty warfare. Orange violation notices appeared daily, illegal fire pit, a Home Depot ring, non-regulation mailbox, improper dock repair, 2 replacement boards, unauthorized shoreline activity, breathing. Every complaint filed by anonymous but written in Karen's tone. My appeals vanished mysteriously at the zoning office where her husband Brent worked, smiling tight and saying paperwork takes time, while Karen's new deck extension and flamingo-shaped kayak ramp got instant approval. Trash appeared on my yard, cigarette butts left near windows, dog droppings in the grass, footprints under our porch lights, and neighbors began whispering louder. "He's unstable." He threatened Karen, "Be careful around him," until people who hadn't even met me crossed the street to avoid me. One evening, while Lena and I sat by the fire pit for her joint therapy, township officers showed up responding to a complaint about hazardous smoke, and behind them in the shadows stood Karen filming with a triumphant smirk. But nothing compared to the 4th of July disaster when we walked down to the lake for Lena's evening float and found 20 strangers partying on our shoreline, Karen hosting a full catered event with DJ lights, champagne, lobster trays, and our dock buried under coolers and drunk laughter. She raised a glass and loudly announced, "Everyone, this is the new guy who threatened me. He gets very emotional." And guests laughed, one drunk man slurring, "You're not dangerous, right, buddy?" While Lena's face went pale and her hands trembled, not from pain but humiliation. When they finally left, our shoreline was trashed, the dock scratched, and Lena cried silently on the porch, and that was the moment something inside me hardened like cooling steel. The next morning, I went to the courthouse basement, a dungeon of dusty maps, old files, flickering lights, and a clerk named Larry who looked like he hadn't rushed since 1972. For hours I combed through maps until I found it. An original 1984 survey showing my property extended 22 feet farther east than the modern plat, which meant Karen's roses, walkway, outdoor kitchen, deck extension, and fancy Italian stone path weren't just close, they were built on MY land. Larry squinted and said, "Well, I'll be damned, that woman's been in trouble before for encroachment," which was the most refreshing sentence I'd heard in weeks. I hired a state-licensed surveyor from 2 counties over, not one of Karen's or Brent's buddies, and 3 days later bright metal stakes started appearing across her manicured lawn like a forest of truth, hammered deep into the ground, thunk, 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 each strike more satisfying than therapy. When Karen saw the stakes through her kitchen window, the color drained from her face so fast it was like watching paint peel in reverse. She stormed outside, robe flapping, voice cracking as she screamed, "You can't do that." Except this time the anger wasn't arrogance. It was fear, real fear. Because after months of bullying, lies, humiliation, fake violations, and weaponized gossip, the woman who thought she owned the entire lake finally realized she had built half her lakeside empire on land that never belonged to her. And for the first time since we moved to Crescent Bay, I wasn't the one standing on shaky ground, she was.